All right, all right, all right. Well, we are exploring different ways that we can solve quadratic equations. And by solving that, we mean finding the zeros, or we could say finding the roots, and we could say finding the x-intercepts, any of those things, anywhere where the graph is going to cross the x-axis, finding where that value is. And in this chapter, section 4-5 is called completing the square. But we're going to start off by using the square root property. And here, this is from page 256 in the textbook. This is example 1, equation with rational roots. Now, so here we've got, we're being asked to solve each equation using the square root property. And we're given a quadratic equation, x squared minus 12x plus 36 equals 25. Now, ordinarily, we'd move this 25 over, subtract it from both sides, and we could still do that and solve this equation, but that would defeat the illustration of what we're trying to do here. Now, if we recognize that the quadratic equation itself is a perfect square, and what's over here on the other side of the equality is also a perfect square, we can use the square root property to solve this. And here I can already see that this 25, well, that's equal to 5 squared. Now, if I look at this other equation, x squared minus 12x plus 36, well, this x squared is a perfect square. The quadratic term is a perfect square, and this constant term, 36, is also a perfect square, plus or minus 6. And then if I look at this middle term, I can see that negative 6 and negative 6 would equal negative 12x. And so I could factor this side of the equation as x minus 6 times x minus 6, or x squared. And if I were to FOIL x minus 6 back, I'd get x squared minus 12x plus 36. And if you doubt that, you can try it. So here we got, we're going to say 25. Excuse me, I'm going to leave this as 25. And by using the square root property, we're going to take the square root of both sides of this equation. So if we got x minus 6 squared and taking the square root of it, and then we take the square root of 25, well, we're going to end up here with x minus 6 equals plus or minus 5. Because negative 5 and negative 5 is 25, and positive 5 and positive 5 is 25. And now we're just going to solve this equation, and so we would end up with x minus 6 equals 5, and I'll bring it over here, well, right here, and x minus 6 equals negative 5, the plus or minus 5. And then I'm just going to add 6 to both sides on each of these equations, and over here I would end up then with x is equal to 11, adding 6 to both sides. And when I add 6 over here, I'm going to get x equals 1. 6 minus 5 is going to give me 1. And so therefore my solution set to this equation is 1 and 11. And there we go. We solved this equation using the square root property. All right, we're going to go over here and look at one more, solving an equation using the square root property. All right, so again, we're being asked to solve each equation using the square root property. And we've got this quadratic equation, x squared minus 16x plus 64 equals 49. Well, I'm looking here again at this first term of the quadratic. Well, that's a perfect square. X times x is x squared. And here at 64 plus or minus 8, negative 8 times negative 8 is positive 64. And positive 8 and positive 8 is also 64. But then in reviewing this middle term, I see negative 16. Well, negative 8 and negative 8. Add those together, it's going to give me negative 16. So I can rewrite this expression as x minus 8 squared. And what about over here on the right side of the equation? Well, I can recognize that 49, knowing my multiplication tables, and if you don't, you need to. 7 times 7 is 49, so that's a perfect square. And now we're going to take the square root of both sides. So I got x minus 8 in parentheses, squared, under the radical, square root, and then the square root of 49. And so the square root of x minus 8 squared is x minus 8. And the square root of 49 is plus or minus 7. Now I can take each one of these equations. Let's say I set this up here. I go x minus 8 equals negative 7. And x minus 8 equals positive 7. And we're going to solve both of these. We're going to add 8 to both sides of the equation of both equations. And so x equals, when I add 8 to both sides, I'm going to have 8 minus 7. That's going to equal 1. And over here on the right-hand side, when I add 8 to both sides, I've got x equals 15. And my solution set is 1 and 15. Now, if I don't believe that, I could plug that back in. Let's plug the 1 back in because that's easy. Well, 1 squared is 1. Minus 16 times 1, well, that's negative 16. So 1 minus 16 is negative 15 plus 64. Negative 15 plus 64, in fact, is going to give me 49, and that would check out. A little bit more difficult if I do 15 squared, which is 225, times 16 times 15. Negative 16 times 15, let's say 160 and 80, to be negative 240. That would give me 240, negative 15, 64. 225 minus 240 is going to give me negative 15. Negative 15 plus 64 gives me 59. So even there, checked it in my head. How about that? Now next we're going to look at equations with irrational roots, our famous i's, imaginary numbers, and then we'll go on to actually completing the square.